Hello, everybody. Tommy Tables here. I am joined, as always, by the inestimable Lou Wasserman's Ghost and Lorn, who I'm sure has been on his toes lately with all of the Star Wars news that's been bounding about the internets lately.
and for the record, Lorn, you don't annoy either of us.
Oh, good. That's perfect.
Are we not men? But are we not annoyed?
Just as long as you don't look in a mirror. So all that to be said, though, we are not going to be talking about Star Wars. We're going to be talking about another movie, another genre. And again, I'm having a little bit of trouble figuring out what exactly to call this. But I will say that this movie is a darn good one. And it is probably been christened with, I don't know, a not very marketable name, Ice Station Zebra.
Yep. But it worked for the book, which Alistair MacLean, who wrote the book, who also wrote The Guns of Navarone and so many other thrillers of that kind, Where Eagles Dare was his. I called it Cold War conflicts as the genre, because there were so many either spy movies or military movies or combinations of the two, which is what this is.
You know what? That's a very good one. I think we'll go with that, Cold War conflict. And it is the first time that we have covered that. And it is a really, really great film to sort of kick off this genre. My gosh. So which seems to be a bit of a trend with me. I had not seen this movie prior to our discussion. And so I had just watched it for the first time. And once again, I was mesmerized throughout. It sort of grabbed you from the first 5 minutes and just did not let you go. And it was half Hunt for Red October, half, I don't know, what would you call the other part?
It does have some elements of a Bond thriller in a way.
In a way, yes.
Spycraft involved.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think it's an interesting story that you obviously, to make this movie, you had to have the Navy's collaboration. And the
100%.
Navy did not want to give it. Because
Really?
apparently the first script that they had written was written by Paddy Chayefsky, famous for so many satirical, hard-edged things, who was very cynical about the military. And the military thought the script made them look bad and said, no way. And they wound up having to fire Chayefsky and come in with a whole new group of writers to rewrite the thing. So,
Wow.
Yeah. And then because of that, Gregory Peck was supposed to be the sub-captain, and he got tied up with another movie, and Rock Hudson really wanted this movie and politicked his way into it because he felt he was being typecast in all those light, fluffy romance comedies, you know, with Doris Day and people like that, and he wanted to do something macho again. And so here he is.
You sure there wasn't a little bit of that in wanting to be stuck in a submarine full of a whole bunch of young viral men?
Not even going to go there. But interestingly, by the way, the story is actually kind of, sort of, maybe based on the real thing. There was a spy satellite project that took film called Corona. And Corona's deal was, you know how in the movie they talk, well, we should probably do the whole summary thing, but they talk about the camera and the film and the ability to take all these pictures. Well, the whole secret apparently in the real one was that they made film out of polyurethane instead of celluloid because at the temperatures in space, celluloid would crack.
Oh.
And we don't know if MacLean heard about it or not because it wasn't declassified, that whole story, until well after this movie came out and well after the book was written. But there is that little bit of verisimilitude, or whatever that word is, involved.
Well, I think we need to give a quick summary on this movie. Lorn, would you like to take it away?
I'm probably not the best one to do this one because this was Lou's movie, and this was also my first time watching it for the first time. So,
Basically, there is an issue about a satellite. The satellite is a combination of technologies because of spying that is a camera, a special film, and the satellite, all of which, one is made by the Russians, one is made by the Brits, and one is made by us. And they all get together, and the Russians steal the other two, and put it up there to take pictures of all of our missile bases from space. The problem is it keeps right on taking pictures when it goes over the Soviet Union, and therefore this one piece of film has pictures and locations and verifiable targeting information for every missile base of the two major Cold War powers. And therefore, when the satellite screws up and falls out of orbit, it falls to this ice station Zebra, which is a ice station. It's a scientific research station that's literally floating on the pack ice in the North Pole. And there is a Brit there that's supposed to get it, but skullduggery does him in. And so we send a nuclear submarine full of Marines and a British agent and a Russian who's a supposedly good guy Russian. And the Russians send bombers and fighters, and it's all a race to who'll get there first, who'll find the film, and who will win the day for truth, justice, and all those good things. That's
Now,
the short version.
well, what I really appreciated and what I liked about this film was the fact that what you just described, like, I mean, you had the satellite in orbit at the very beginning of the film, and you saw something get ejected, and you saw it land in the Arctic. And then you saw two people kind of starting to fight over it. But you are not told what exactly it is until, gosh, I would say almost maybe the last 20 minutes of the film. So the entire time, you're kind of in the dark, just like the heroic Captain Faraday, played by Rock Hudson, is throughout. And they only finally reveal it to you sort of at the climax of the film. And so that was kind of neat because I guess, you know, if you sort of stepped away or if you went off for intermission during one of the intermission breaks, which was really kind of interesting. I don't remember the last film I saw where they had intermission breaks. You would kind of think, okay, well, they're, you know, put two and two together and decide that, yeah, okay, maybe there is something of that related to spy camera and film and whatnot. But you don't know until they tell you. And so it kind of adds to the tension of the film, I think.
But you know that, you know, it could lead to war.
Yeah, there's something there.
It's well, one of Hitchcock's MacGuffins, you know, the thing everybody's going for.
And I mean, maybe it's just because I was influenced by all those reports of aliens in that Miami mall, but I was, you know, almost wondering, is there something science fantastical in that little capsule that fell to Earth? Like it did kind of keep you guessing a little bit.
Yes.
I think one of the strengths of the film, and something that we didn't mention so much, is that the captain of the boat is given his orders under seal, basically, and he's not really aware of what they're going and doing either. He's being told that he's going to have this British spy brought on board named Jones, and he's essentially going to call the shots. That they're he doesn't really need to know anything about what he's doing. He just needs to get them to this ice station. And in the process, while they're already underway, they receive a message that says that they need to rendezvous with a helicopter that's going to come, and that drops off two more people who they also don't know. And so there's a lot of tension on the boat because nobody really trusts any of these people, and that causes a lot of tension throughout the entire mission because everybody's keeping secrets. And I think this is probably, why you like this movie so much, Lou, is because I know you're a tremendous Patrick McGoohan fan.
You bet
and
I am.
He plays that part to a T.
Oh, yeah.
He is just plain brilliant. And I think the scene, you can find this clip on YouTube, where he's talking to Rock Hudson so calmly about, listen, as far as I know, your orders, which came to you from the Secretary of the Navy, which came to him from your president, say, you're supposed to get me there. That's the whole thing you've got to do. So do it! And he gets all crazy wonderful in that way that McGoohan can do. And this was his first U.S. movie, by the way. Although most people don't know that Patrick was actually born on Long Island.
Oh.
Not in England. His family moved back to England when he was 7 years old, I think it was. I've met him a couple of times briefly because, frankly, his daughter married a good friend of mine. So,
oh my!
But and then he also another friend of mine worked on a series he did called Rafferty, and I was, as a young man, madly in love with The Prisoner, which of course is probably his most famous thing, other than Secret Agent, which was known as Danger Man over in England.
Well,
But then he did, the Scarecrow for Disney, and so many other good things. But this was his big coming out party in American movies.
Well,
And
yeah,
he's
I mean, The Prisoner, I recognized him from that immediately, and I thought, my gosh, that was awesome. But okay, Lou, you have to answer me this then. Why does he have no eyebrows?
don't know that he doesn't. I think they're kind of blondish. I'm looking at these pictures and I see eyebrows, but and he also, by the way, got very, very good friends with Peter Falk, and I think he did 3 Columbos, each time as a different character.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
But going back to what you were saying before about Lorn, about how this might be a fun genre that Lou particularly likes because the tension, you're not sure who you can trust. How can you not trust Ernest Borgnine? I mean, come on.
And it's interesting to me that he gets second billing because he is, after Rock, of course, the most famous actor, but he's not exactly a leading man, and it's usually, of course, in a normal movie, it would be the girl, but there is no girl.
Yeah.
My God, this is a whole boat full of annoyed people. But anyway.
I do feel like Big Jim Brown got a little bit shortchanged in his role here. It was great to see him, but he didn't have a lot to work with.
They didn't give him much to do. That's true. That's true.
Well, and they had that was by design because he was there also to keep the audience guessing.
Right.
Is he a turncoat? Is he actually a plant by the Russians? Because I mean, part of the film, you've got Rock Hudson and Patrick McGoohan and saying, well, this guy just kind of showed up out of nowhere. You don't know him. I don't know him. Do you know him? And so it was, I get, I get what you're saying, Lorn, but I think that was in service to the dramatic tension at the end of the day.
And I might add, there's a 6 degrees of separation with this movie with one we've done. Do you know what it is?
It's Patrick McGoohan again.
No. It's Tony
Spaceballs?
Bill.
Oh, no.
It's Tony Bill, because Tony Bill was a young actor who decided he wanted to be a producer, and he is one of the producers of The Sting.
Oh, so you're going a different direction than I was thinking.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because Patrick McGoohan was also the previous Phantom before the Phantom.
Oh, well, that's true. Yeah, that's right. We've got 2 connections here. So the genre guys, 6
degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Exactly. Had nothing on us. But
now, one of the big things that happens in the middle of this movie, they spend an awful lot of time showing you the operation of the ship and the navigation through the ice fields and how very technical and dangerous it is to be traveling in these ice-infested waters. And they're trying at a certain point to break through the ice by surfacing where they think there's a section of thin ice, and they hit it with their conning tower. And they cannot break through. And so they hit upon the idea that, well, we'll launch one of our torpedoes and remotely detonate it to try and break through the ice. And they get ready to launch this torpedo, and they're going through their pre-launch checks, their pre-loading checks. And it turns out that there's it kind of works a little bit like an airlock in that you're supposed to have, there's an inner hatch and an outer hatch.
Right.
And the outer hatch has to be dogged before you can open the inner hatch. And it turns out while doing this check that there's a little bit of dribbling water, and they start to open the hatch to check, and it turns out that the outer hatch isn't dogged. And so water starts to flood the forward compartment, and that leads to the ship starting to go down. And it's a tremendously tense scene. But that leads to a question of who sabotaged the sensors and the port, because it's very quickly determined that that's happened.
Because you have to remember, submarines have what is called a crush depth, because as you go deeper, the pressure gets worse, and sooner or later, the hull can't take it. By the way, the sub that they used, the real sub, as opposed to all the models and the sets, that they used off of San Diego to do the scenes, for example, where they're dropping Borgnine and Jim Brown by helicopter and a few other things on the deck, it's a 1944 World War II submarine that went through a conversion to give it that sleek atomic style sail. So
interesting.
It was launched in January of 44. It's made 5 war patrols, and in 52 to 53 they converted it to what they called the Guppy class, which is streamlining the superstructure and putting in a snorkel and things like that. So this boat could never get there. It's strictly the nuclear boats that can go under the ice.
Yeah.
Now,
yes.
I do want to ask you, Lou, It seemed to me that this was a plot hole, and I want to see if you agree with me, which is that if I spoiler territory, we've already kind of hinted at it. Borgnine is the the traitor.
Right.
But if he's the traitor, how did that torpedo tube get sabotaged? Because he had never been in that section of the ship prior. They made a point of saying that, and they even hinted that it had to be sabotaged prior to leaving port. So if that's the case, there's still potentially one uncovered or one non-uncovered spy in that crew that isn't dealt with.
Well, I think if it's in the port, it doesn't have to be on the crew. It could have been some of the guys servicing the ship, and he might be there so that if that doesn't work, he's there to stop it once they get there. So there is that.
And what was really interesting, too, is that you did, in fact, have a couple of scenes of Ernest Borgnine walking around the sub suspiciously, and it was sort of the various levels of inception in this movie in terms of, is he the spy, is he not?
Well, and he's so jovial and nice, it's almost like he's too nice. And indeed, McGowan knows him very well from their work together and says he's the best anti-Russian Russian we've got. But it turns out he wasn't so anti-Russian. And there's this wonderful scene where they ask about the person, whoever it was, who sabotaged it, saying, well, he'd go down with it. And he'd be willing to do that just as much as you are for what you believe in. Yeah. Where he's basically telling on himself without us realizing it entirely. Some good levels to this thing. I mean, I know it was a second script by different people, but they did a good job building the tension into this. And by the way, this was shot 70 millimeter entirely, which is, for those who don't realize, when you see a movie come out in 70 millimeter, it doesn't mean it was shot that way. A lot of them are blow-ups, but Christopher Nolan notably, and this movie and a few others, shoot in original 70 millimeter, which is very expensive because the film is bigger and there's less of it on a reel and you need more of it. And it's also something where you're in a confined space in a submarine, and yet that wide screen almost makes it feel more confined. You get this sense of being stuck in there because most of the movie happens on that submarine set.
There's actually a couple things that I thought were pretty clever about the way they shot it too, which is that when they're diving right at the start of the picture, the camera is tilted, and they make a big show of the fact that people are having to lean backwards to walk down. To try and counteract gravity. Another thing that really struck me is that I knew this movie came out in '68, and you kind of know your history and what went on during the Cold War at the time. But even now, I was startled at how modern the sub actually looked. And how advanced it must have been for the time. That was a little eye-opening. Yes,
and by the way, the cinematographer, Daniel Fapp, this was one of his 7 Academy Award nominations. Oh. And he has a very rare distinction. I'm not sure who else ever had this. In the same year, not this year, but 1961, he got 2 nominations. One, because in those days they had one for black and white and one for color. And the black and white movie was 1, 2, 3, the Billy Wilder Cold War comedy, you might call it. And the other was West Side Story, which he won the Oscar for cinematography. So that's quite a career and a connection.
But it just sort of following on that point, I really want to drive it home. Like Lorn, I was, I guess, a little bit surprised or not expecting the level of technology that existed in that film. Like, for some reason, I had it in my, and maybe this is Hunt for Red October to blame or what have you, but I had it in my head that we weren't using nuclear powered submarines until much deeper into the 70s. So to see it in the 60s, and that speaks to my really poor history education in high school. But
let's see. For your information, the Nautilus, the first commissioned nuclear powered ship in the United States Navy, not just submarine but ship, it set off on its first voyage on January 17, 1955.
Wow.
So, and then in 58 was when it went around the world without surfacing.
See, I think there's a difference, though. And it's like, I knew all of this going in.
Right.
But seeing it, it's a little bit of a different thing. And it really made me think about, it's like this movie was shot in 68. The first flight was in 1903. And so in that 65-year span of time, you've gone from the Wright brothers with their contraption
Yes.
that actually managed
Yes.
to fly, to 1 year after this movie came out, man landed on the moon.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
an incredible level of advancement in
Wait,
a very, very short period of time.
I'll give you a more interesting one. The very first submarine that I've ever read about in history, the Turtle, was during the Revolutionary War. It would go up to a British ship, and it didn't have torpedoes. It had a big, like a brace and bit screw drill on the outside, and it would drill a hole in the ship to sink it. So from 1776 to, or whatever year it was, the other little piece of trivia and talk about years. This year, 68, when it came out, the wonderful, wonderful score, of course, is Michel Legrand's. And I think he probably would have gotten an Oscar for it. It's so good, except that he got the Oscar for another movie that year, both for Best Song and for Best Score, and that was the Thomas Crown Affair and the song Windmills of Your Mind.
Oh my.
All the same year. So it was quite a good year for movies and music, and maybe
And I mean,
after we do all the genres, we'll do all the years, great years of the cinema or something. But
to follow on Lauren's point, though, we landed on the moon,
yeah,
and then what is it now? So we're in 2024 now, and look, we've got TikTok. So I mean, you could say that our rate of progression was just as fast.
Look at it this way. The time between the Wright brothers' flight and this movie is actually a greater span of time than this movie's released to where we are now.
yeah,
That's true.
yeah,
Yeah.
and of course Sturgis, the director. I mean, talk about a range. In fact, just before this, the movie he did before this was called The Hour of the Gun, and I will recommend it to everyone.
Okay.
It is a retelling of the gunfight at the OK Corral, the Wyatt Earp story, with James Garner in the role. Very serious movie. A fantastic, fantastic score by Jerry Goldsmith, by the way. But 2 years before that, his previous film, The Hallelujah Trail, is a comedy western with Burt Lancaster and Lee Remick and Martin Landau as an Indian and Brian Keith and Donald Pleasance. And it's a grand, grand, wonderful romp of a movie. And I mean, a couple of years before that, The Great Escape. A couple of years after this, Marooned, Le Mans, McHugh, and then his last movie was The Eagle Has Landed. So that's quite a career. Now it doesn't even go with all the other minor things. So
Yeah, no.
That was one thing that I was thinking as I was watching this movie, is that this is when they were still making movies. It was kind of an event kind of a thing, it seems like. I was a little surprised after watching it. I did a little reading up on it, and it sounds like it actually didn't do well at the box office, and critically, it wasn't very well regarded, and that surprised me.
I know Ebert did a famous dump review of it, saying it was dull and slow and pointless, but it did make money. It did make money. It cost, I think, $8 million, and it made about 75 around the world.
So I got here the budget was 8 to 10 million. Box office is 4.6 million for United States and Canada. That doesn't say the world though. So
and I wonder, because remember in those days the 70 millimeter Cinerama theaters did not charge more money than they do. And this is a 2.5 hour long movie, and all of that could have contributed to the fact that it didn't have the kind of play. On the other hand, one very famous fan of this movie watched it all the time, and you know who that is?
Mm-hmm.
Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes, supposedly when he was in his recluse hermit status on top of the Desert Inn in Vegas, not only did he own a 35 millimeter print, but he owned a local TV station, and he would call them up and say, put it on, play the Zebra movie, and they ran it 150, 175 times during the course of his being there.
wow.
Because he just loved this movie. So,
Well, per Wikipedia, it's saying that Ice Station Zero holds a 47% rotten rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 15 reviews with an average rating of 5.3 out of 10.
15 reviews, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, boy, the people have spoken.
Well, I was wondering if it was because of the length. The movie does focus. I mentioned that it focuses on the maneuvering and the ice and some of the technical details of maneuvering the boat. And I wondered maybe if that lost some audience members. I know it would today. But I
Well,
wondered if that had any impact when it was when its original theatrical run.
that and the intermission, as I was
Yeah.
mentioning, I actually saw this in its premiere engagement at the Cinerama Dome in Hollywood as a kid, and I loved that intermission. The entr'acte music that he wrote, which was just shots of the sub crashing through the ocean with
Yeah.
that wonderful theme, and it got you back into where you were before you went out to pee and get more popcorn, you know? So, but I doubt the average theater ran that. It was probably cut down some. So I don't know.
Well, you know what, and this is I'm almost a little embarrassed to say this, but what that kind of reminded me of, the music as well as all of the beauty shots of the submarine as it went underneath the waves, as it was, gliding along. It reminded me of the part in Star Trek: A Motion Picture where you've got Kirk and Scotty in that little space pod flying around the Enterprise. And so for some people,
there you go.
They thought it was, I think one of the criticisms was that it just took way too long. Like, why are you
called it
focusing
Star
so
Trek: The Motionless Picture?
Yeah.
Which was unfair because for those of us who'd loved it,
The Motionless
and waited
Picture,
for it,
yeah.
But for those of us, I mean, remember, Star Trek had been gone from first run for, I think, 10, 12 years before that picture finally got made. And it was the show that just wouldn't die because it was being run in reruns. So they wanted to give you back your Enterprise, and by God, they did it. And I loved that sequence. I could watch it again today. Talk about movies with great music. The movie itself was so-so, I think, unfortunately. But the score, and especially for that sequence, wow.
Well, the score became the quintessential Star Trek score. But going back to Ice Station Zebra, it was very much a similar feeling. And for somebody like me who I guess loves technology, I loved it. I was just like, oh, this is so cool. Like, I mean, the camera shots, you had the camera, which was presumably attached to the model or the sub going under the water.
It was a different sub off of Hawaii that they shot all those underwater sequences on, and that was a nuke.
But it was great. And I mean, the part about being under the Arctic, the claustrophobia of that, right? I mean, I think we all have nightmares.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
It's a Canadian. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lorn.
No, there was, you mentioned the claustrophobia, and there's one scene in particular I wanted to highlight there, and that's when they get to the ice pack and they're going through this just horrendous storm. They're all lashed together with ropes and they've got their pickaxes and everything. They can't really communicate with each other because the wind is so high. And they're marching across this field and they hit a section of thin ice and a bunch of guys all go down into this crevasse.
Yeah.
And it's narrow. It's this little tube. And as they're trying to situate themselves to get out, the ice starts to contract and begins to close in on them. It's very much the trash compactor scene from Star Wars, only almost 1,000 times worse because it's narrow. You have all these guys hanging together by a line, and so it's just like this worst. That's one thing the movie does very, very well is ratchet up this tension. The other scene that does it is that one where the compartment gets flooded that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And you remember that to try and keep the water level down, they start flooding the compartment with air. They're trying to pressurize it, kind of force the water to flow more slowly. And the guys in that compartment, they've sealed the bulkheads. They're stuck in there, and they're dealing with this pressure on their heads, and they're screaming in pain.
Yes.
That's realistic, and it really sells the moment.
And you have to wonder, thinking about it now, if all of this attention to submarine detail happened because of that issue they had with the Navy about the first script and doing the second one. If they said, okay, listen, Navy, come on in and tell us how it really works and we'll make it real. And if that didn't obviously help the film enormously, that they were trying real hard to tell it straight. Because, this whole movie, other than those few scenes with the real sub, and a couple of the second unit things and a little bit out at Goldstone in the Mojave Desert, those satellite antennas at the beginning. The whole movie is happening on a big soundstage at MGM. The sub, the ice fields, everything. Nobody went on any locations for this. So to make it real and make you care about these people, that's not something that always happens.
No, it is obviously a soundstage when they're on the ice shelf and everything, but at the same time, it looked the storm, the snow, the sound, the wind. It looked like being on another planet, and it really made you appreciate. It's like, man, I never want to go that far north. It just looks awful.
Exactly.
Well, as someone who deals with that sort of weather every a couple of months of every year, though, I will say that it's usually pretty tough to do a convincing winter scene in Hollywood, and mainly because of the fact that you don't have the frosted breath coming out of their mouths, right? And so that's always a dead giveaway.
And Capra, when he made Lost Horizon, actually shot scenes in a big ice house in Hollywood, so he'd get that effect.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
But
now he didn't do it on Wonderful Life, but they invented a whole new kind of movie snow on Wonderful Life that since then was used on everything. So, they try.
But no, but it was a job very well done. But going back to the compartment flooding scene, though, right before the accident happens, you have this conversation with, I suppose, one of the gunnery officers as he's checking out the torpedo tube, and he's going on and he's saying, it's like, hey, you're the tomcat of the boat, but you're settling down and getting married. He's like, yeah, I just found this great girl, we're gonna tie the knot. I just got permission from the captain, and we're like, as soon as we get back to port, it's gonna be like a wonderful life and stuff. And you could almost see the death flags all around him. Like
it's like the dialogue equivalent of a red shirt
right?
on Star Trek, right?
True.
But I was surprised, though, that his was one of the few deaths. Like, I was convinced that the one person in the blue coat in that ice compactor crevice was going to croak, and yet they made it out. That was interesting.
Well, of course, we're rooting for the good guys in this movie, and so they don't want to. Nowadays, they'd probably wipe out half of them. They'd have a big running gunfight with the Russians before everybody calmed down and figured it out.
And I would bet that if they were going to do this movie in modern times, the Russian would not be the turncoat. He couldn't be.
Yeah, that's true. But the black guy couldn't be either. So who's left?
Right.
Well, it'd be McGowan. He'd have to be the one.
Well, yeah, and of course McGowan has this great line also in the movie where he says to Rock Hudson, he says, "Well, it can't be me by process of elimination." He says, "Why is that?" He says, "Because I'm the reason the whole damn thing is happening in the first place. Without me, there's no mission, so it can't be me trying to kill it." But
if they had, or if they ever did do a remake of this film for modern times and modern audiences, I would guarantee you that as soon as those Russian paratroopers landed, they'd be like running guns blazing towards Rock Hudson and all of his intrepid crew. The fact that they walked up calmly and that there was a dialogue, I suppose I've been conditioned to accept that as soon as you've got soldiers in a film, anything related to action, you'd immediately start having those guns going off. And I was surprised by the dialogue.
But that's the message of the movie.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we don't love you. We're not going to trust you. But for now, we're not going to set off World War III. So let's all be calm.
Yeah.
And I thought, what's his name? Alf Kjellin, who plays the Russian commander, was awfully good in this movie, too.
He was.
In a small part, but boy, it made it work. And it gave Hudson somebody to deal with of an equal stature.
I am normally a man of violent tendencies, but I am holding myself back.
Well, that was a great line too, because he's trying to prevent them from getting itchy trigger fingers. He's doing the cat thing where he's blowing himself up, making himself look bigger, and he does have 100 troops behind him, so he's got the advantage there. But he's hoping this doesn't come to conflict. What I loved about that scene is that when they do blow up the film and neither side can get it, at that point, he's right. The point of the conflict is over. It's like, well, we can't have it. You can't have it. There's no point in us shooting at each other because that's just going to trip off a war. So
exactly,
let's go our separate ways.
Right.
And the press release at the end was gold. Oh, my Lord. I don't know if I want to spoil that for everybody, but
and that's absolutely the way they do it, too.
Yeah.
Part of what I like about this movie is that besides it being a Cold War conflict movie, I think you could apply another genre label to it as well, and that is the closed room mystery. It's like one of my favorite, more recent examples of that would be The Hateful Eight. You've also got the direct-to-video second Starship Troopers movie was the same kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And these are some of the great movies where you have usually adversaries that are locked into a lot of times you have these as subjects of stage plays as well, where you have adversaries locked into a single room or a single place where they can't leave, and somebody is the antagonist, and you don't necessarily know who it is. And so you ratchet up the pressure as the movie goes on. Things go wrong, power gets cut, the lights go out, somebody screams, somebody dies, and everybody's looking at each other thinking they're all the murderers. And that's always a fun genre to play in.
Yeah. I'm so thrilled that both of you enjoyed this so much, because it's a movie people either love or say, Cold War. Because I'll tell you something, when Godzilla -0 or 1, whatever, I forget what the number is.
-1.
-1 came out. I told people it's a great movie, but if you're taking your kids, you're going to have to explain to them what was happening at the end of the war and what happened in Japan afterwards to get the context. Well, with this movie, there's a lot of people out there right now listening to us who never lived through the Cold War.
Yeah.
Be grateful that you didn't. Who weren't doing duck and cover in their schools, and who weren't watching JFK on TV telling us there's missiles in Cuba and we don't know if it's going to blow up the world. So the tensions were real for the audience of this movie. The fear of a conflict was very, very real. And this movie, aside from all the other things, it told us that our guys, and to some degree the Russians, but especially Rock Hudson and his crew, as stand-ins for the entire American military, we're going to take care of business, but do it with sensitivity and carefulness, and not
honor,
blow up the world, and honor. Absolutely.
Like, there was a chivalry there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, especially in the engagement with the Russian Commodore, it was very much a case of, two equals meeting on the battlefield and not devolving into just sort of barbaric savagery, but instead, like almost logic. I'm not even sure how to describe it properly, except for the fact that there was a mutual respect. There was an honest attempt on not only the Americans, the good guys, but the bad guys, quote unquote, the Russians, to avoid conflict, which I thought was really interesting.
And 4 years before this, 1964, I was just looking, both Failsafe and Dr. Strangelove. That's an interesting simultaneous whatever, but people were seriously worried about this stuff, and also making a movie about something that has that level of reality to it in its context. Hate that word ever since those idiots. But anyway, it's you have to be real careful how you do it, because you want people scared, but not so scared they don't go, and not so scared that they think it's a different kind of movie than it is.
Another reason I think that you get that sense of the fear of what would happen is that, remember, this only would have been 20 years removed from World War II.
Yeah.
And World War II was only 20 years removed from World War I.
Yeah.
And so you're right in proximity to that. It's the same level of remove that we have from 9/11. And so...
by the way, I'm thinking right about the time this movie came out, within a year or so, was the first time I, as a student on a student tour, went to Europe, and particularly to England. We studied at Oxford and one thing or another. And there were still bombed out buildings in the middle of London, in the West End, where all the theaters are and the nice hotels. You'd walk along and suddenly there'd be this hole that hadn't been filled in yet by another building. So there were physical reminders to everybody. And certainly any kid my age who saw this movie, their dad was in the war or somehow involved. So it was real. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. There was no, it can't happen, we wouldn't be that stupid, because, we were that stupid twice. Why not a third time?
Yeah. I think that's honestly why we're dealing with some of the problems that we have today in society, is that you have some words that are bandied around pretty carelessly today.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of that is because when I was growing up, those people that fought in those wars, those were my grandparents. I had an actual connection to them. Mm-hmm. The youth of today doesn't know anybody who fought in World War II. They don't really know what it was about outside of, and I hate to say this, the Indiana Jones version of what World War II is. To them, it's a pulp story or it's a video game. it's not the reality of what World War II was. And so when you use words like that as a pejorative, that's a really serious word that should not just be thrown around casually.
Yeah. Absolutely all true.
People don't realize the horrors of the Second World War. I mean, you were lucky if you lived past 30. I mean, I shouldn't say that, but these were people who were 30-year-olds, who were 20-year-olds, who were the ones on these submarines, who were riding these tanks, who were shooting these weapons and dying by,
well, one of the interesting things that if you know the great historian now past Stephen Ambrose, his book on D-Day brought up something that always fascinated me. He said everybody assumed the Germans would win because the German troops were all battle hardened. Most of them had fought against the Russians, and they were experienced. And the Americans were all these kids who'd never seen combat before, and therefore the Germans, surely with their experience and their wisdom and their savvy, their street sense of the battlefield, would wipe us out. In actual fact, we won partly because our guys didn't have the memories of that and thought, well, we're here, we're going to go ahead and win. And the Germans were all thinking, I guess my number's up. I've been through so many of these, I can't last much longer.
Well, there was also the fact that the Germans turned on the Soviets, and that was a tremendous mistake.
Well, yeah. But, and here they are again at Ice Station Zebra, the Russians.
Right.
Yeah, you got to remember also in 1968, China wasn't on the radar, literally. I mean, yeah, they were there and they were commies, but it was all about us and the Russians. And Europe was the battlefield.
This movie made an excellent point about the Germans engineering everything for everybody too.
I love that wonderful scene where they're talking to folks who haven't seen the movie. It's a great moment for Patrick McGowan, and he's trying to explain about how this MacGuffin happened. And
how they got the satellite up.
Well, basically, he says, your German scientists our German scientists made the camera. Your German scientists made the film, and their German scientists made the rocket, and they stole it all and they put it in orbit. So, that was, of course, the Werner von Braun joke, I guess you'd say.
It was hilarious, though. There's another line at the very beginning where Jones has just been brought aboard the ship, and he meets the captain in his wardroom. The captain is not happy about the fact that he doesn't really know what this mission is about, and he's trying to pry details out of him. And this is where Jones is telling him, "You don't need to know." Mm-hmm. And the captain is pressing him on details, and the Jones says, "Is that door soundproof?"
Yeah.
And the captain says, "More or less."
Yeah.
And Jones says, "Is it also true that aboard an American naval ship that not a drop of whiskey is to be found?" And I thought that was a great line too.
Yeah. Especially because in the British Navy, of course, they all got rum rations.
Yeah.
And for those who haven't seen it, Rock Hudson smiles and says, "I think we could manage some medicinal whiskey if the need arose." Yeah, it's got so many great moments like that. And none of those great moments, unlike a lot of stuff we see nowadays, I'm looking at you, Disney Plus and Paramount Plus and everybody else, they don't just stop the plot to have a 10-minute chinwag. Yeah. They don't just freeze the action for everybody to sit around contemplating their navels and discussing life in the universe. It all flows with the story.
Yeah.
And I mean, in one sense, when they're talking in the wardroom, nothing's happening except the ship is moving. But you still feel the tension of the situation.
Well, I mean, I would say that I was very surprised by the comment that this was a film that had to be rewritten and rescripted and whatnot. If you hadn't told me that, I wouldn't have bought it. This film just starts and it goes and it doesn't stop. And I mean, yes, to answer your question a bit earlier, Lou, I loved it. I'm gonna go rewatch this again. Like all the movies that we've been covering, I've just been having a blast. And so this was great.
Well, McLean's books, I mean, look at all of them that have been turned into great movies, whether you take Guns of Navarone or Where Eagles Dare. He wrote some good stuff for movies, Yeah,
so, I want to thank you for making this suggestion too, because like I said, I had never seen this movie either. and I felt a little embarrassed after watching it that I hadn't. This felt like one that I
Yeah.
should have seen.
Well, golly, that I don't feel good that you're embarrassed, but I feel good that you guys. I'm looking forward to the ones that I've never, because honest to God, there's movies I haven't seen that you guys will bring up and we'll get to sometime too. So, although
Zoolander
next time
2.
I think everybody's seen it, but I'm not going to give it away.
But I mean, well, that's it though. And again, this is going back to the production values and the cast and whatnot. I was sitting there watching this thing, and I'm thinking to myself, yes, I hadn't seen it, but I've heard of a lot of older movies that I hadn't seen, and this I'd never ever heard of this. And like the feel of the film was one that it was it felt like a 1968 version of Independence Day, right? Like a blockbuster. And I'm just kind of sitting there just confounded by the fact that, yeah, before you had mentioned it, Lou, like I would have, even someone else telling me this great film called Ice Station Zebra, and I'd be like, what is that, like a South safari documentary or something? Like it would have completely slipped by me. So I highly recommend.
I just thought of another 6 Degrees of Separation.
Uh-oh.
Most people don't know this, but Patrick McGowan's first big hit role as John Drake, Secret Agent Man, aka Danger Man, at the beginning of the original English titles, which you never saw in America, because all you got was Johnny Rivers singing the song about Secret Agent Man, they mention his various code names. And his, like 007 has a number. Mm-hmm. John Drake's code number is ZM73. So there's a Z for zebra going on there too. How's that for a reach?
Well, gentlemen, let's wrap this up with the thing that you like the most and the thing that you weren't that keen on. And I'll start with Lorn on this one.
I think for me, I'm not going to zero in on a single thing, but I would say every scene that ratcheted up the tension, that sold that you're in the environment on this boat and it's in real danger, I love that. There were a couple of times, especially when the compartment was flooding and they had to dog all the hatches, seal off the compartment. They're diving down, and you're seeing their depth readout displaying how fast they're going down. You could hear the ship groaning. You can hear the men screaming. The captain is telling him, back up as hard as you can, push the reactor past the red line. And I'm holding my breath. There's a point at which one of the men is praying that the reactor doesn't blow. And one of the technicians says, what does it matter? In a couple of minutes anyway, the ship's going to be crushed. When you're feeling that anxiety, when you're gripping the armrests of the chair, when you're holding your breath yourself, that's when you know you've done a good job of building the tension in the scene.
Yeah.
So on the flip side then, Lorn?
For what is the thing that I like the least?
Or is there something like a criticism that you had, or just something...
I might bring up Ernest Borgnine's Russian accent. That's probably the biggest complaint that I would have.
See, now that's interesting, because what Ernest Borgnine did was a classic Hollywood Russian accent.
Yes.
And I know from having been to Russia twice, that sounds nothing like any real Russians. Because a lot of Russians speak with a kind of a weird Slavic variant of an English accent, because most of the people that taught them English were English, not American. So they talk funny over there. But
so what about you, Lou? Highlight and low light.
You know what? Low light, I think Tony, Bill, and the other Marines are kind of like too preppy for their own good to be really combat Marines. I'm glad he got to be a producer and win an Oscar for this thing. And not that he was a bad actor. It's just somehow that Jim Brown being the hard ass, there should have been some hard ass Marines besides Jim Brown, because Marines are hard ass guys.
Yeah.
But the positives, golly, it's got to be both Rock and Patrick, who are so good together and so good apart and make the show real for you. But my number one thing is the music. I think the score is just wonderful and brilliant. And I just put in our private chat a link to, there's a guy named Soundtrack Fred who does great suites of great movie scores on YouTube.
Okay.
And you ought to put that in the notes and let people just turn off their screen and listen and imagine these shots of crashing through the waves and sailing the bounding main, because in a way that music It's the best of Star Wars music. It's the best of Korngold pirate movie music. It's the ocean, the sea has a special quality to it when it comes to great movie scores. It's certainly Star Trek. Anyway, the music is my favorite thing, and the idea that he did the Thomas Crown Affair the same year is
That's
kind
wild.
of. I saw Michel Legrand was a trained classical guy, but then he heard Dizzy Gillespie and suddenly fell in love with jazz, and that changed his whole perspective. Not that there's any Dizzy Gillespie in here, but it gave him that, if you will, American musical sense to go with his French roots, and I think you hear both of them in this. Anyway, it's a
So,
it's a damn fun picture, and I can see why Howard Hughes, well, at least once a month, but a little more often might be too much. But if you got
all right,
nothing else
Lou,
to do but be rich, I guess that works.
low light. What was a low light for you?
Well, like I said, the Marines, other than
Oh yeah,
Brown,
yeah. The
we're not
Marines. Yeah, you're
we're
right.
not
You're right.
Marines. And we
Sorry, I
forgot
was.
to mention Lloyd Nolan at the beginning as the admiral who gives Rock his orders.
Yeah,
He's perfect for that kind of part.
that's very true. Well, I will say that geez, there's a lot about this film that I really liked. I loved all the stuff on the sub. I loved the in-depth look of it. Like it again, as a giant Star Trek fan, being able to go back and see the inspiration for it. Like you almost felt like you were on a starship, but you were on a submarine instead. And sorry, Lorn.
I was actually going to say it's like the you didn't really get sub combat in here, but a lot of the feeling that you get in the Wrath of Khan when they're looking for each other in that nebula is the same kind of feeling that you have under the ice there. They were doing a classical naval kind of a conflict there.
And I think the closest equivalent to starships among all the various kinds of warships are submarines.
Absolutely.
Because all the greatest movies of starships, all right, you've got fleets and fleets of the bad guys with the Emperor, but it's one-on-one out there beyond the pale. You're not protecting the fleet or traveling with a bunch of other ships. You're out there, toe-to-toe combat with the Ruskies, so to speak.
In a pressurized little can floating around.
And a limited number of people in their own little world and their own family, if you will.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, the other thing that's bad are those shots of the Russian jets where they're all kind of in a straight line. That stuff is later. Supposedly, the director said, "Yeah, I wish we'd have done that better." And believe me, if you think it looks bad on your computer in 70 millimeter, it really looks like where are the Thunderbirds when we need them. So there is that. But gee, they made it work.
And then I would say the only other sort of low light to me was just, and this is a very minor criticism. It's just the Arctic scenery. Like you could, I guess I watched this in a very high definition TV, and so you could see the styrofoam. You could see the kind of like the white goop on the doors trying to simulate frost. But again, that's just sort of the Canadian in me who's used to seeing what these things actually look like. And if you don't look too closely, it's something that completely flies by. So it's all good. Well, gentlemen, final thoughts.
If you're watching the scenery too much, the movie's not working.
Yeah. Final thoughts, gentlemen. What do you think?
Go see it, everybody.
Yeah, it's definitely worth seeing. I never having seen this, I was very pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, it's a long film. Fortunately, you have bathroom breaks. And
God bless the pause button. You get older, you really appreciate the pause button. I got to tell you guys.
Yeah. But this was great. Like it was just a great, well done, engaging, fun, exciting movie with charismatic leads, charismatic actors. Like the sort of the chemistry between Rock Hudson and Jones the spy was just fantastic. It was great. Like
the rest of the crew, Gerald S. O'Loughlin, who's a staple character actor, and let's put it this way: Rock Hudson is a guy a crew would follow.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can't say that about all the captains of all the ships and all the movies out there.
Very much true. So on that note, gentlemen, thank you. It has been an honor and a pleasure. We didn't get the film in the end, but no one did. So hope I just didn't spoil it now. But audience, thank you for bearing with us. Did you
We'll
see
you next time?
Yeah. Did you see Ice Station Zebra? Have you heard of it? Did you like it? What are your thoughts? Go out, watch it, come back, drop us a comment down below, let us know. Keep your comments coming. We love reading them. It was a really, really great reaction that you guys gave to us for The Last Starfighter. And so that was quite a nice Christmas gift. A lot of the fantastic feedback we got. So keep it coming, guys, seriously. And if there are other genres that you'd like to suggest that we review, we'll be very happy to do so. But we've already got something else sort of on the radar lined up too. And I'm not going to spoil it right now, but yeah, thank you for tuning in.
Yep. Absolutely. The good thing is we won't run out of material because there's too many really good things out there.
Yep. Just wait till we review Last Jedi. Sorry, Lorn.
That'll be the time to quit.
Yeah, I can actually do that for us now.
Okay.
All right, on that note, have a great night, day, wherever it is that you're listening to. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed that special presentation of The Genre Guys here on T3PO. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more content like it, and if you want to enjoy episodes of The Genre Guys as soon as they are released, be sure to become a member at WTW Pro's YouTube channel. What were your thoughts on this amazing topic? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you for joining us here on T3PO. Please comment, like, and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to That Park Place Podcasts Online, your source for exclusive content and highlights from WTW Pro, The Pro Show, and That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.